Hello, tabletop wargamers, and welcome to Tried and True, a podcast hosted by the Delaware Warmachine community. Join us as we dive deep into topics around our favorite games, exploring methods and techniques proven to enhance anyone's gaming experience. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 13th episode of Tried and True. I am your host, Paul.
I'm Dan.
I'm Andy.
And I'm Erica.
On this special bonus episode, we are going to be talking about Mark IV, and we are joined by Craig and Brandon from WarJax. Say hi, guys.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, what's up?
What we wanted to do is have them on. We actually had Dan and Erica on WarJax episode 40 a couple weeks back, and we wanted to return the favor and talk about Mark IV.
Woo.
Yeah, I know, right? It was like super exciting. What we wanted to do is, go ahead and thank Gonzo from More Than Dice for giving us an additional platform to be able to go share the good news. If you want to follow us on YouTube, subscribe and like to all the good videos, see the bat reps. And speaking of subscribers on YouTube, we actually just hit our 500 subscriber goal just this past weekend.
Congrats.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was like super exciting news. So the Frozen Forge raffle has already been started. We've already reached out to the winners who ended up getting it. So just check out the comments. Some of our winners ended up not having their emails in there. So, just make sure to update your email. We're giving you a week per the document guidelines. And then finally, we want to just thank all the patrons on Patreon for giving us their support. Now, what I wanted to do is go into the episode. Now, Craig and Brandon and Sean, from WarJax, already had a great Mark IV episode. And it seems like everybody and their mother and like all these other podcasts, even people who don't play Warmachine, are doing their hot takes on it. So what I just wanted to do was actually just have that opportunity to, us talk about Mark IV, but to kind of do a hot take version of it. Now, before we get into it, Craig, I have to say, when I listened to the episode, how did you get Malorian on there? Like, would you just like talking to him one day and he was just like, yeah, sure, I'll come on your episode. Like, it was so random. I did not even expect it to happen.
Yeah, so we've kept loosely in touch since his, soft quotes entire retirement. So the morning after, I think, the rules dropped, he had DM'd me on Discord. Just like checking in, we were sharing our thoughts, and I was like, hey man, you should just come on the podcast and talk to us about it. And I didn't think he would say yeah. And he was like, yeah, that'd be fun. I was like, okay, cool. We'll make it like a surprise thing. So I didn't tell Brandon or Sean, and we just kind of coordinated it and he popped on.
Yeah, I have to say, when you ended up saying or whenever he said like, welcome to the Worst Warmachine channel, I was like, oh my God, like he's here? Yeah, I mean, like I was not expecting it. I don't think anybody was. It was such a nice surprise.
Definitely.
He's got a pretty tight intro line, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been a fan of his stuff, and every now and then I'll go ahead and like look at one of like the older videos, and it was just really cool. It was really great to listen to him, and I know you said about the soft retirement. I hope at some point he comes back. I definitely think the community could definitely use his awesome insight, and a great guy. What I wanted to do on this episode, though, right, because again, as I said, everybody has already talked about Mark IV. Well, we wanted to do a hot takes on Mark IV instead of like going through the whole document like everyone else has done. But even before doing that, I think what would be really cool is a retrospective look from like Mark I to Mark II, and then Mark II to 3, and 3 to 4, etc. And just like kind of like see like the major beats that ended up happening in each edition. And I think we'll actually go ahead and start with Erica. And for the sake of your sanity and ours, I'm going to be like emceeing. So, certain people will talk at certain times. So Erica, can you actually start by like talking about the history of like Mark I and what it was like? Again, like as I mentioned in Swinkle's episode, right? Where like Deathjack would just like charge your caster. So can you just provide your insight on that?
Sure. So I guess as the most senior player here, God, I'm old. Okay, so it was the early 2000s, and this, at the time I was just getting into tabletop wargaming. Anyway, a bunch of guys started playing Warmachine. I hopped on Hordes. I think the first Primal book came out in like 2006, 2007, around that time. So started playing Circle. Mark I was an interesting time. So when we talk about different iterations of the game, so I am a Mark I player. So some of the more outrageous rules that we had back in the day, models had this lovely rule called Abomination. Doom Readers had it where they scared not just your opponent, but friendly units as well. So you had to be really careful where you put those models in the game. Models would flee the table. That was always fun. There was command checks. So similar to Warhammer games, every time your unit hit 50%, you would have to make a command check based off the command of your unit. Circle units back in the day had very low command, so my units constantly fled the board, and every time you hit a new 50% threshold check, you would have to make a new command check. The Death Jack rule that Paul hinted off to at the start, if you did not allocate a focus to Death Jack, he would charge your Warcaster and attack your Warcaster until you put focus on it. So a common tool was to mess with Death Jack in a way where he couldn't accumulate focus, and now you have a heavy Jack that's trying to kill your own caster. So to be completely transparent, I really didn't play a whole lot in Mark II, so I'm coming as a Mark I, missed most of 2, coming to 3. And I have to say that each time this game has gone through a transition, I feel like it's been positive. So some of those crazy rules that were in the game, like people running their Doom Reavers, feeding with Vlad 2 and running the Doom Reavers like 20 inches across the table to scare your opponent's army off the board, like that stuff isn't in the game anymore, which is a big plus. Yeah, and again, Warmachine isn't the only tabletop game that I play. So AOS right now, right there in their 3.0, and out of the previous editions that have come out, the game has gotten better. So I'm going into Mark IV very optimistic. And one of the big things I'm most excited for personally is being able to kind of do this soft reset on the field for all of our players, both our veteran and our new players, kind of starting over without having to jump on a brand new IP. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah, I think that'll help bring our community more together rather than be a polarizing thing.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, do you mind if you can go ahead and explain your experience of Mark II? Because I think you played Mark II the longest, and then Craig and Brandon, I know you joined in right at the tail end of it. So if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, Eric, I wouldn't say that going to Mark II got rid of Doom Reavers running at you and making your units panic. In fact, it kind of gave the game one of the most iconic lists it's ever had. Kador had they introduced things called theme forces in Mark II, and almost nobody played them. But every once in a while, you'd find one that was really the cream of the crop. And being able to put an unlimited amount of Doom Reavers on the field and doubled and tripled down on those command checks could really punish certain armies. And mostly the game didn't get too much of an overhaul from Mark 1 to Mark 2, but they did fix a lot of some what were seen as really punishing or kind of game breaking mechanics. And you saw changes like Sorsha could only wind rush once per turn instead of an unlimited times per turn and be anywhere on the board. So I think they were reining the game back into a more reliable aesthetic in terms of the rules. Like you could expect certain things and you could count on certain things a little bit more, and there wasn't some crazy stuff. But my history for Warmachine starts in about 2010, and I've been playing ever since. So I went through most of Mark II, and overall there were just things that were super clunky, like you couldn't really even run Kador WarJax as well as cast upkeep spells on your first turn, which was always kind of an issue. So in Mark II, my last thoughts on it are that there were a lot of traps you could fall into when building a list for the game, because you could take any army and throw it together, any unit from your faction, and they could all exist together. But it was easy to make mistakes doing that. And if you weren't picking the right choice of unit to go along and support your army in a certain way, it would drastically affect how your army could perform. And that's one of the key things that they changed when they transitioned to Mark III. And I can go into how those things were patched up later, but I'm interested in hearing what the WarJax guys have to say about their Mark II experience.
Go ahead, Breezy.
Sure. So that's where I started the game. It was like 2013. We had a local store that was huge Magic, huge Warmachine and Hordes. And they kind of talked me into it because they're like, you could pay like a couple $100 and your army's good to go, right? It's not like Magic, doesn't rotate. And I remember Mark II, so the worst things are some of the things Eric has said, right? Like the fear check, things like that. But from what I understand, like in Mark II, it put a little more focus on like the Warmachine, like the beast and the WarJack aspect. 'Cause I think that's when your caster got WarJack points. And also it chilled out the cost of everything, right? Like it went from Warhammer hundreds of points to like, we played 35 and 50 in Mark II. So now when I used to play, though, we'd have like no terrain on our tables. And I don't even think we played with scenarios, but I do believe Mark II is when Steamroller came out. So I think there was still the biggest problem, if you want to call it a problem in Mark II, is that they still had you could not pre-measure. You could only measure your caster's control area. And so Mark II still had a lot of those problems of if you want to call them problems, like because this is probably a big improvement from 1, but just of like better players getting to kind of gotcha more than the newer editions. Like I feel like going forward from 2, they get those things lower and lower each. Like you get a better chance to compete the newer you are.
Yeah, so my story is pretty similar to Brandon's. Actually, that's how we met, was I guess this was probably the last, like 6 months, maybe a year of Mark II is when I started playing, and we met at our local game store. It's interesting to think about the edition change because like at that time I played very casually. Brandon and I played very casually. Like we were not like in this deep as we are now. I mean, I had no problems with Mark II. I think the appeal to me, like how I got started in it, is I read online somewhere, some forum. It might have even been the Privateer Press forums, but someone was like, "Oh, it's like Magic with models." And I was like, "That's sick! Like, sign me up. That's all I want." And then it kind of was. It also, it also kind of isn't. But so I had no issues. Like at the time, I wasn't even like analyzing rules or asking myself like if I thought this was good or not. I just accepted it at face value for what it was. I was like, oh yeah, this is the game. This is how you play it. And then when we transitioned from 2 to 3, same thing, right? Like I had no issues with it. And in my mind, I was like, oh, it's just going to be better because it's newer and more up to date. But there was a lot of things that changed. That we've already mentioned. I remember like if you were shooting into melee, you had to like check to see, like if you missed the target, you had to see if you shot your own guy, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think even that rule made its way into Mark III, and now going into Mark III, I'd like for Erica, Andy, and I, actually just all of us to talk about it. I mean, Erica and Andy, we ended up playing on the ping pong table to begin with, right?
Bro, we played on that. What did we have before we had real furniture? We had like,
we with the
patio
lawn,
furniture
the
in
lawn
our
patio
dining
furniture
room.
in the dining room. Yeah. Yeah, I think what year did we pick? Was it like 2016, 2017 when Theme Machine was being announced?
Whenever Grimkin came out.
Yeah, Erica saw Grimkin get announced and she was like, I'm buying all of that. That is mine now. So she dragged me along with it at the beginning of Theme Machine, I guess, when themes were just starting to come out. And I hopped back and forth between a couple different factions before I fell in love with Protectorate. And then I bought that entire faction because that's what you do. I don't have a ton of experience from before that time period. I think a lot of the rules I got to experience were like already in the polished period where everything already kind of made sense a lot of the time. So I don't think I've experienced the pains going between different versions of the game as much as a lot of everybody else has.
One of the things, I guess, the differences between Andy and myself, and I guess Paul to a certain extent, is your expectations of time. This isn't going to be a quick rollover. We're looking at least, I would say, minimum, realistically speaking, 2 years after this thing launches before it feels more fleshed out and smooth. So that there's going to be that period. And I would just ask that people who are going through this for the first time acknowledge that and know that that is something to be expected. But just to go back to when Brandon and Craig and even Dan, when they were mentioning stuff in Mark II, like for me as a Mark I player, I completely forgot. I was like, yeah, there was no pre-measuring back in the day because it was so like outrageous, and it's been so removed from the core mechanic of the game. So moving forward, that's kind of where my head is in the game with all of this, where it's eventually we may be having this conversation again 6-8 years down the line, and we're going to have some big epiphany change in Mark IV that 3 has, and it's like, oh yeah, for real, that game did have that back in the day.
And I'd like to go ahead and put my own 2-piece in on this. Yeah, that's when I started to play, and I played for a while to get to the level that I at least felt competent enough as the player that I am right now. But, there's a lot of things that I had to learn and discipline myself in order to quote unquote get good at Mark III. And I guess that this would be a great transition into Mark IV because some of the changes that they decided to make, I mean, well, if we're talking about the rules, it seems that the change that they're making is only helping the game and making it more friendly moving forward. So what I wanted to do is get like some insight with Craig, if you don't mind. Can you kind of talk about like what you think about like the changes going forward? Like, what do you think it's going to go do for newer players or people experiencing this game?
Yeah, I think I mean we'll get into it, I reckon, but there's definitely a lot of things that are like you see them and you're like, yep, that makes total sense. I'm here for it. I think there's already like big things that have been improved upon greatly.
Yeah, for sure. So it's funny because I went from just not knowing how I was going to feel about it a few days ago to like, I would say a spicy take of like, I think for just from the excitement I have for it, I have the thought that it's going to be better. And we just have to play the games and get used to it.
And then what about your metas down there? Like, how was the reception at your stores? Because we can go into it. We can talk about the receptions in our area, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, I guess even in New Jersey as well.
Hey, really quick before we talk about our metas, congratulations to WarJax. You guys just hosted your first steamroller not too long ago.
Oh, yeah. Congrats.
Yeah.
And that looked,
Nice,
your
yeah.
pictures were awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad that your first event was successful. So congrats.
Yeah, thanks. We copied your homework and it worked. So thanks.
Oh,
That's
sweet.
why we did it.
Yeah.
So successful we could not even play in it.
Yeah.
Oh,
That happens a lot, honestly.
Yeah, we
That's how you know
don't
you
play a
made
lot
it.
in ours.
Yeah, when you start running steamrollers, you quickly realize that you stop playing the game as much. Unfortunately, just how it girls.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, our meta, we suffered from, I think, what everybody suffered from in the Mark 2 to 3 transition. Like, we had a really strong, really active meta in Mark 2. And then at the launch of Mark 3, it completely dissipated to literally, I think it was just me and Brandon for the longest time. And then as, Mark 3 evolved and kind of grew, Brandon and I started playing more. And then our meta now is still very small. You mentioned our steamroller. We were able to attract some players from other metas in Gainesville and South Georgia and such. But as far as the vibes at the store, so we have 2 stores locally, one of which does support Warmachine very well. It has a nice big wall full of product. The scuttlebutt is he's going to be ordering and has his finger on the pulse for the new product. And I suspect, so as far as players go, it's pretty much the same 6 or 7 of us. And at any given, we usually go up there on Thursdays and play. It's usually just me and Sean, right? But there is a group of enthusiastic minis gamers that play. They're just excited about minis, right? So they're playing Monpoc, they're playing Fallout, they're playing like if it has a miniature, they even buy Warmachine stuff. They just don't play it much. So I get the feeling that once these new boxes hit the shelves, I can almost guarantee you they're going to scoop it up and try it, which is exciting.
Yeah, I know our Delaware meta and the Pennsylvania meta are actually 2 very different environments. Our Delaware meta has a few last holdouts from Mark II, but in Delaware we have the last couple guys from Ice House who are kind of still hanging around, and they're like, they're the old heads in the meta. But the rest of them in the Delaware meta anyway are sort of like me, Erica, and Paul, where we joined up in Mark III and we've been playing for somewhere between a year and 5 years or something like that. And I know the Pennsylvania meta. I know you. I know Dan. You've been up there a lot more than we have, but there are a lot of guys who've been doing this a long time. Like
up in Pennsylvania is like here there be jank. A lot of those players just love playing really weird stuff and like gotcha casters and things. So it's definitely a different feel to it. And I had the same experience that the guys down in Florida did when Mark II to Mark III happened. The game kind of crashed in my area, so I ended up having to branch out and like with next to no one playing at my local game store, I was like going north and south to wherever I could find a game store and a tournament to play in for a while. But since those days, it's been coming roaring back as well.
Yeah, and even we have a revitalization down in Maryland. Ryan and Sam and their crew over there. They had Ryan was a Mark 1 player that came back into the game, so he was very excited to find out that pre-measuring was now a thing. Which he was like, "Huh, pre-measuring's a thing? What a time to be alive!" And it warms my heart every single time to think about that. But and I think like Sam was a Brawl Machine only player, but the guys seem to be really super excited about the changes going forward to Mark IV. So it seems like the overall, I guess, feeling or the overall mood is that there is some hesitation, or there's a mix of hesitation and excitement. And I think it just goes back to, at least that hesitation goes back to, what is it, that saying of gamers hate two things: change and the way things are.
Well, I would just say too, just I guess to mention during the meta part is for us as community leaders, and if you're a community leader at your store, it's really important to be positive and work with your players, because this is an intimidating, what if kind of time. So it's important for like you to set the example and, kind of all go through this together and try and avoid the doom and gloom that
Yeah,
you
especially
see
from
online.
especially from the perspective of people who are worried about the invalidation of their models. Like that's a big sticking point for a lot of people, and you're going to have to try and work with that with people to play the legacy games with them. Like you can't let that die.
Yeah, take a poll of your players. If they want an unlimited tournament, run an unlimited tournament. If they want prime tournaments, run prime tournaments. But go with the flow of the community and try to mix it up to make sure that everyone can compete and everyone can enjoy it.
I actually wanted to go back to Erica's point from earlier, because I 100% agree with you. As community leaders, we have a responsibility in order to, I mean, we're the faces of our communities, of our metas, right? If you see the captain jump ship, what's going to happen with the rest of the sailors, right? And these players have really, they've become committed to the game, right? And I understand that it's a bit of a scary time, right? Change is a little bit scary, and we don't know what's going to happen. But I think an optimistic view for what's to come will only help this game and help the communities grow. And with that, I think it'd be a great time to transition into the actual article itself. Now, instead of just us, going through every single point, I just wanted to highlight a couple of the specific major beats that were in that document that Matt Wilson posted. And I wanted to start off by saying that I like the fact that he presented, these are the different options that we were thinking of, and this is the reason why we went with the option that we're doing right now. It was like X, option 1 didn't work because X was a factor, option 2 didn't work because Y was a factor. And I just liked it because it showed transparency, and it's not like us going to the Facebook message board and saying, well, have you tried doing this? I mean, I really liked the way that they presented their information. And I guess at this time, if I can have someone from WarJax, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with you. And I think that's been a trend for Privateer Press within the last maybe like 6 months or so, just them being more public facing with their Primecast, and then, just being a little bit more like letting us see behind the curtains a little bit is just really nice. So I think I agree with you. The article was not only really well written, but like gave
It was
a
very
lot of
needed.
insight. Yeah, yes, agreed. It was we needed it. So
Yeah, I think it could have spread out some. That was a monster
it was a
of an
big
article.
one.
Yeah, I don't know about
But,
you, but I had to go read that over like multiple sittings. That was a doozy of an article.
Same.
Yeah, for sure.
I do think because it was so big, it feels like and it doesn't even feel like it's confirmed because we've been seeing like messages and stuff. But I think some people are still unclear about the structure of the formats and like what's legal, what's not, what to expect from releases moving forward. And it does pretty clearly spell it out, but it's kind of hard to extract what exactly is happening from the article.
Yeah, it feels like everybody at PP, their job right now is just be on a lot of social media platforms just for hours of their day.
Right.
Well, even in Discord, right? It's the Trash Panda Discord. They have like the Ask a Privateer channel. They're like answering stuff in there all hours of the day.
Yeah, but what about everybody's thoughts on like the new structures, of moving forward? Because the instead of like factions and themes, we now have the factions, the armies, and the cadre. I actually just realized, I found out that it's a French word. It's actually pronounced cadre, so we're butchering it over here.
Just say cadre.
Speaking the Queen's English over here. You know what I mean?
So for me, factions are really, I gravitate towards an aesthetic, a flavor, something that I really want to see cohesive. So for me, I may only buy maybe one army in this, and maybe two, when it comes to what Mark IV is, because I don't feel like they're concentrating on one large cohesive faction with themes inside of it. They're kind of splitting everything off and saying this is its own army with its own flavor, and there's going to be smaller armies with maybe the cadres that kind of mix in between them.
Hey, but like, what do you think about the decision of doing it? Because I kind of like the idea that they can focus on an army like House Dusk and be like, okay, this is what we're working on from now. We're good and we're done. Now we can go work on the next army, or I don't know, maybe even like figure out like cadre that end up or the cadre that end up working for the two different armies. Like, what do you think? I think it's like really cool. It provides really clear direction and, keeps the scope of these armies really limited, or at least very direct.
I think cadres are going to be sort of pseudo mercs, and I think it's a really good idea because you're not going to be able to work on because there's going to be more armies than there probably are factions at some point.
I think that this is a kind of elegant way to somewhat change back to the list building from Mark II, where you could take pretty much anything that you needed from the available models in your faction, except at this point it'll be take whatever you want in this army. But with the addition of cadre, you are able to get that specific tool. Like Signar might have a gun mage's cadre, and they would say like, well, I need something accurate that can take these blocking models away and maybe deal with a light armored unit. I can grab them and put them in, and they can slot into my army to like help adjust and fix what the army does against certain matchups and stuff.
Yeah, and just going off of what Dan was just saying, if the cadres function anything like they do in Warcaster, it'll be interesting because if I'm not mistaken, if you take all the models in the cadre are available to your army, right? If you take all of those models in the cadre, you get a bonus. So I'm curious to see if that translates over to Mark IV.
Honestly, I think the best part of what they're doing is they're just going to prevent themselves from running into what has happened. Like, they're not going to have to remove 1,300 SKUs because if you want to play Storm Legion after 6 months, 12 months, like, they're not getting another release, right? Like, they're not coming back, adding another Warjack, another caster. Like, maybe they do more cadres. I don't actually know if they're going to keep adding those to the factions, but like, you're done, right? So you can either grab another army if you want, or at least know that like I'm army complete, and I don't have to worry about power creep in my own models. And
Yeah, the only thing I guess if like the way I look at it and compare it to, so we look at like GW games. So if I look at, Age of Sigmar, you have, death, destruction, order, chaos. So like for me, I play Skaven. So I look at, your faction being, chaos. And then from there you have Skaven Tide. Then you have your individual clans, which would be your armies at this point. So like Clan Pestilence, Eshin, Skyer, etc. And then your cadre would be like your battalion. So your sets, models from a different sect or whatever it is that gets these special bonuses as long as you take them all together as like a minimum. So that's like in my head canon, that's how I'm kind of looking at this new hierarchy of, factions, armies, etc.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next point. How about the app? And you know what? I would love to have WarJax take the lead on this part. What do you think about the app?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, the new app is probably the most important piece of this whole announcement. And it's funny because like in my I get, how if you have an iPhone, you get your notification. I get mine on Sunday mornings. It tells you like your screen time. And I posted this in my Discord. My screen time is down 47% because I haven't opened War Room. Like since the Mark IV announcement, I'm just like super hyped for Mark IV. For I don't think I'm alone in experiencing this, but like I'm ready for that new. And so I haven't opened War Room, and I spent so much time in War Room. And Brandon and I, both being in technology, and like we always talk about the app. We always talk about how important it is, and it really like War Room is pretty good. It has its bugs, but like I think it's a good app, and it's functionally good for like list building and like storing your armies and stuff like that. So my hope for the new app is that like it just is awesome and it does everything that we all feel like the new app should do. And reading the article, I think what excites me most is it seems like Privateer Press is really trying to gather data from the app, which like I think that's so important for them to get those data points and be able to like analyze and make decisions off of real user feedback from the app.
I took it for granted that they couldn't collect data from this app. I'm sitting here building lists and going, if I just keep building lists with bad casters, maybe they'll never fix them. Who knows? Maybe they think they're good. I don't know.
So coming from a background in computer science and IT, I've always felt that War Room was kind of like a sluggish implementation. But maybe I've just had bad phones. I think that for my part in it, I care for having cards at the table more than an app because I spend a lot of my day staring at a screen to begin with. So when I go and play this game, I want to unplug and I want something more analog. So I prefer using cards with little screen protectors and markers for my damage. I would like to see that continue to be supported. The stat cards, along with the WarJax, are what initially drew me to this game because I never wanted to play a game that had a codex and a textbook that I had to read while I was trying to play this game. But everything punched out right there on that stat card for you was a huge sell for me. And I really want that to be part of the game that continues forward.
I learned the game in Mark III, so I learned it using War Room 2, so it wasn't like a different thing for me. I'm actually really looking forward to the new app. I will happily pay $4.99 for lore dumps monthly. I don't really the cloud storage thing is a little bit different for me because I only really use one device for storing my armies anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. But there's been a lot of promises with the new app. With army sharing, with your opponents and everything. I really hope it's everything they're saying it is because I will happily use it constantly.
Personally, what I really love about the new app is that it has everything. So you won't have to go buy all the faction decks in order to, while your opponent is doing their turn, you go and take a look at their stats of their, warlock or warcaster to try to set up for an assassination or, which one of these models had countercharge again or something like that. I just like the fact that you have access to everything, and it makes the game a lot, I guess, more friendly. And then also you can go somewhere to take a look at all the rules before you even go hard with one of these new factions. So I love it. I think that this application, this new Warmachine app, is going to be a game changer.
The good news for you, Dan, is the lead developer did say they were going to make cards from the app printable.
Hell yeah. All right, I'm sold.
When a kink goes.
Everything else about this app is like really aggressive though. They're targeting to do a lot with this, and it's a full scale overhaul of what War Room 2 is even currently capable of. I'm excited to see what they really churn out here.
I think I'm excited too so like the idea, I don't mind buying the card packs, right? Like it is what it is. Like you're supporting Privateer Press in the game, but I think it's more exciting that they got a little bit more business savvy in doing the subscription model. It's like, you have that constant revenue stream, and that's Warmachine money. Like, so like they'll know like, hey, we're making X dollars from this app every month if it does well. So
it's also an incentive that subscription model is also an incentive for them to keep adding to that app to make it worth a subscription for more and more people.
Yeah, and if we can kind of look at the successful Iron Kingdoms Kickstarters as like a sounding board of how successful this subscription model is going to be. Like I plan on going in on the monthly subscription as well. I think it was smart, and I think it's going to be very successful.
And you know what I'd like to do right now is to go on to the next point. So Matt Wilson in his article said evolve or die. And yeah, I don't want to go down, I mean, I guess we can go down this rabbit hole, but like, what do you think the game would have been like if we just would have continued business as normal? It's Mark III, or we're going to keep on designing this Mark III process. What do you think the game, the community as a whole would have looked like, I don't know, like 2 to 3 years from now?
I feel like it would feel like a lot similar to the end of Mark II into the beginning of Mark III, because with a wide game like Warmachine, they do have some tiny little cracks in the sidewalk here and there. And as the edition grows older and older and matures even more, you tend to see those start to widen. It happened near the end of Mark II. There were some things in the game that definitely needed to be addressed to avoid a negative play experience in some cases, and they overhauled those things in the next edition. So you can just kind of feel the strain on the game engine after a while. And Mark IV is starting to feel like, for me, refreshing of that, and like almost a panacea.
I think from a revival perspective, post COVID, I think Mark III has been doing really, really well with an established player base. Probably not as well as it could have been with getting new blood into the game, but I think we all have to remember that they're not physically capable of making a lot of their old models. Like they don't really have an option other than what they chose to do, and they explained that to us very clearly.
I mean, I think a year or two down the line from our perspective, because we're going to all these tournaments and everything, we're going to think that the game looks like it's doing great, but I believe we're such a minority of what War Machine players could be. Like with Mark IV, you're going to go back to we're maybe like 95% of people just go buy models at their store and go play at home on the kitchen table. We have no idea who those people are, right? And they're probably the larger like revenue stream for Privateer Press. And I think going forward, it's going to probably just explode for them unless it doesn't work out. But I think those are like the two options. I don't think there's a middle ground.
The only thing that I would say with kind of, with they're releasing the like the army boxes and you're good to go, is to kind of take a look at the landscape of what's going on economically right now. So it might be difficult to, you're going to have that initial, $200 cost to get an army box, but then you're good to go. And you're not spending on average to start in Mark 1 or Mark 2 or Mark 3, hundreds to like my Kador army, that's over $1,000 right there. So when you talk about evolve or die, I think it's good that they're kind of taking a look at what's going, on, and the fact that you can just have this initial investment, buy your army box, and you're good to go.
Yeah, but you know what I wanted to actually like highlight is the change to, or I guess the evolution, the change to 3D printing models. I think that that's great. And, I like go back to like the whole thing, the international shipping. It was a pain in the ass in order to get these products overseas. I think that this is great. Craig, didn't you like have somebody on your show like a short while ago that talked about having to proxy everything because they didn't have access to like any of the new models?
I think that was Dan from Chaosborn.
Yeah. It's just because they didn't end up having the stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he bought up all the attorneys, man.
Yeah, he said it. I think over there in the UK, they really struggle to get stuff, so they proxy like everything.
Yeah, I know, right? And I mean, like, I just think it was a great decision because, I mean, now, like, Privateer Press can set up shops in the UK, Australia, anywhere in order to go ahead and make these models. And, then they're not paying those international shipping fees. I think that this was a smart move by them. It might be an expensive, like, initial cost, but just think about how much money they're going to be saving down the line. And the fact that you have people that are able to go and buy these things now, like, oh man, I am super, super happy with this change. And I wonder if other, companies will, follow suit.
They could open up a shed in like every country in Europe and stick like 6 3D printers in it, and they'd have a pretty good supply chain going.
I don't know if that's the best idea, but
Maybe something better than a shed, I guess. I don't know.
Hey, how about some Conexes?
I'm not the best hobbyist in the world. Drilling out a model for a rod or a magnet terrifies me. When I bought that for $50 and I don't want to ruin it. So these being easier to assemble, I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, and what I was really super excited about was the magnification. When I saw, I think it was like Matt Wilson's video of like the magnets just clicking in place, it was so satisfying to watch. And I was like, yes, I want this. And I guess like the last point I'd like to go ahead and make is, how about the timeline? I absolutely love the timeline. I think the last time I remember seeing something similar to that, I think maybe it was like the CIDs when they said like these are the next CIDs that we have planned, like coming down the line. I mean, this timeline, it was just so great.
So the timeline thing, when I saw that, I first thought of that like crazy Disney Marvel, like this is phase 4 of our movies or whatever the hell they're up to now. That was my first initial thought. No, I'm glad about the timeline. Some of the, I guess, criticism that I've been hearing is like, oh, like that's it. I'm like, well, what do you mean that's it? Like you're getting something every month or every other month. So it kind of puts out those expectations for me as a customer of their product. I was happy to see the timeline. With the release of, I don't know if it was release of Mark II or Mark III, where the announcement, like which one had the cinematic trailer?
The one during their Primecast Plus?
The cinematic trailer, I'm sorry, with Haley and Denegra.
Mark III, I believe.
That was Mark III. So some of what I've been, again, I wasn't here for it, but some of the feedback that I've been seeing online is with the release, like with a trailer or something a little bit bigger media-wise, that Mark IV isn't having the same sort of media release.
Yeah, it feels like the announcement was more directed toward current players in my mind.
I agree with that 100%.
Like they explained to us like what the reasoning and we needed that like you said, that cinematic like boom, like, and I feel like it was, since we're talking about the timeline, like I don't think the time, so it's great. Like I agree, like seeing that like long timeline and there's just like littered with Warmachine everywhere. It's like, yes, this is like a dream come true. I don't think it's aggressive enough. I think you needed to launch with 4 factions, and I think the announcement could have been timed in such a way at an event, or to where it's like, boom, Mark IV's here. Here's your 4 factions. Buy it today and try it.
Yeah, I guess that's that. Yeah, thanks, Craig. Yeah, that's kind of where my head was going with it. Like more of a bigger, like, I don't know if PPs, this feels reserved to me for a huge, big addition announcement. So maybe we're waiting until October when it's more fleshed out. But this just seems a little muted to me.
Agreed.
Given
Yeah, I
the
agree with
time
you.
of the
Oh, go
year,
ahead.
I'm really surprised they didn't wait another month and drop this at Gen Con.
Yeah, it does seem weird. You really want the hype to be there when you're actually releasing the models. And I think I agree with you, Craig, where you want the beginnings of the game to be complete, so you don't have the only prime armies are Signar and Orgoth, and they are the only ones who can play against each other, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think, I don't think you want to give people the opportunity to like think about it. It's like you want them to be like, oh shit, Mark IV is here. It's like literally in front of me. I'm gonna buy it and try it. Like I have to. And now, like, it got announced. We have to wait like really until October before it's in most people's hands. I know they're selling some at Gen Con, which I will definitely try to order if possible. But like there's that like wait period of like, and I've said this, I think, I don't know if I mentioned it on our podcast or whatever, but like you only have that one chance to make that announcement and capture that like impact. And I feel like it may have fallen just a little flat.
Yeah, it might be even a little bit longer because, a lot of the larger events, see the Novas, the Boker Brawl, all of that, that's all going to be Mark III until the end of the year. So,
Right.
I do hope that we do get like a big surprise when we get the beta app in October, and that the Legacy Prime armies are actually kind of interesting. Because I was talking to Sean a bit today about it, and I was like, I'm down with just showing up with Crucible Guard or something, right? Like if you, I think the Signar models look great, so I'm gonna buy Signar. But if I was a Dusk player or wanting to see the Warlocks next year, I think I would really give a shot with like what they do with our current legacy models in Prime. And if you're like most people, you're probably just playing locally. You can play unlimited. Like it's all gonna be the same rules. So I think that's a ton of work for them, but a really good middle ground. Just to keep the regular, just show up at the store and play people happy.
I think is really interesting. And I'm going to go back to that timeline for a second, right? And they did have those 4 releases, right? They had Storm Legion, Orgoth, Khador, Winter Corpse, and House Dusk, right? Well, look, you know what I would end up like saying, or like what's like some players would say, cool, you have these 4. Well, what else is there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just like, we're like super excited about it, but I think that it was actually smart the way they ended up doing it, because like playing devil's advocate, if they didn't end up meeting this deadline, if it's like something similar, like like the slow roller from the Kickstarters, and I mean like that had its own set of issues, I think that this cautious approach was probably the best decision that they could have done, and then that way, if this pace works out, then they can start to ramp it up.
We'd also want to make sure that it's a good product that's coming out too. So we could, like, to go back with Paul's point, sure, we could quick release these 4 factions, but let's say they're unplayable or imbalanced, and then we're just rushing to get models out on the table. I mean, that's not conducive either.
Yeah, and I mean, like, depending on that experience, you might end up getting people that would just wipe their hands clean and like, this is Mark IV, I'm out. So yeah, going back, I think this, if we can call it a cautious advance, I think it's probably the best decision that they could make. And who knows, like, what's going to be coming down the line.
Yeah, I said earlier that I thought the changes to the app were aggressive, and I look at this roadmap and I see that it's a bit more conservative. So what I'm seeing here is that they're just making sure that they don't miss a deadline. That what they are promising in this transparency letter is that going to be what they deliver on, and these are manageable achievements. This is a good little pizza tracker.
For sure. Yeah, and to your point, like they put it on paper, like, so maybe it will, like, the timeline, the deadlines, really can't be missed, or it'll hurt a lot if they're missed. So maybe they are in a position where they feel really confident about it, and so confident that they're like, let's put this all on paper and put it out there.
Hey, you know what I wanted to do, and I wish I had it. Can someone like pull up the calendar real fast? Because I'm trying to remember like the dates of like the releases, and the last one I remember was like Dusk. I think was April. Is someone sharing it right now?
I'm sharing it.
All right, cool, thanks. Yeah. Look at it, right? So if you go take a look from like, April to August, there's nothing there. I'm not a soothsayer. I do not know the future, but I mean, that's a lot of months for stuff to potentially be, eventually coming out.
Fair point.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and I think back because I'm going to be playing Dusk. Like, if you go take a look at these other factions, Signar, Khador, and Orgoth, they're getting all their boxes and bells and whistles, and Dusk is only getting a starter box in April, and I have to wait like what, like another year? I don't think so. I don't know. I think that there might be some more stuff that's coming down the line. Again, it's just speculation, but I'm looking at what they're not showing us at this point. But who knows? Maybe they're going to be using that time in order to go ramp up stuff for like Neo Mechanica, Riot Quest, or Iron Kingdoms or something like that.
I think that what we're going to end up seeing is that that chart is going to continue. Like you said, there's a lot of months in that gap there. And if you base it on this pattern, they're coming out with 1 or 2 product releases every single month. If that continues, your starter set's going to release in the start of April. You might have the next box by the end of April, or the next faction might get a starter set by the end of April. It just means they haven't necessarily committed to that on paper yet. But based on this pattern, there might just be a ton more product releases that just keep churning out.
Yeah, and this goes back to the expectations too. It's going to take some time for all this stuff to get online.
Fire, boys, please.
I also wanted to mention too, like it makes total sense. Like if looking at the timeline from a business perspective, like ramping up going into Q4, like with a new edition, just ready to rip through Christmas is like probably a really, really smart move. So
So with that, I actually wanted to go and move on to the final part of this episode, is to talk about the rules changes. And instead of just going through all the rules step by step by step, Andy and I ended up playing one of those beta tests that Privateer Press released the rules for, and I just wanted to highlight the things that I thought were great, the things that it seemed a little bit rough, and I know Craig, you said that you didn't get a game in, but feel free to chime in whenever you'd like to, and Brandon too. Like, I have to say, first of all, I'm going to preface it with this. I love the fact that they gave us a little bit of a sneak peek of the beta rules, so we knew what was going to be coming down the line. I think that this was great because that way we can see how the game's going to be changed, and what it's going to be like playing it going forward. And it almost feels like an open beta, like what you do with video games. So I mean, I made my notes, and I ended up shooting an email to Privateer Press on what I ended up experiencing in my game, and it was cool. It was great. But I wanted to start off by talking about the first game changer that I saw was the removal of facing. I have to say, I absolutely loved this because I was playing Crix, Andy was playing his Protectorate, and my Banes were able to go after whatever they needed to. I was able to go charge the things that are in front of me, behind me, whatever, and it was just great. And I think even my Warcaster Agathea, she was able to swing at 2 guys that I don't think she would have been able to attack both of them if she had that 180 restriction that we had before. But I'd love for someone to, I mean, if anyone wants to chime in on the removal of facing and what they think about it.
I do.
Okay.
Because it's very similar to some other games that I've been seeing. Like, and I can see evidence of this later in the changes as well. I played a game called Gill Ball a few years back. They had 360 facing on every single miniature, and currently I'm also playing a lot of Marvel Crisis Protocol, also 360 degree vision. And my impression coming from those games is that they lead to movement dynamics for miniatures that are a little bit more freeform, a little bit more. It doesn't lack precision. It just gives you a little bit of generous wiggle room to work with, rather than having to be so laser focused that it really creates a restriction on the time it takes to move things.
I was initially very much against the removal of facing because I really like there to be tactical decision to be made on like everything when it comes to this game. Like, say somebody's ambushing, do you turn your models to the side of the board in anticipation of that and show your back to your opponent? Those kind of decisions were really important to me. But on the other side, there are some really good upsides to removing a facing. When you need to get models base to base, and there's a lot of, Mulg's giant stick is 3 inches over his base, like it's just not going to happen. So I think it makes the game a little cleaner. I think it's overall a positive change.
I'm right there with you. My thoughts were when I saw this, I was like, I hate this. Like I love facing, I love arcs, and Brandon and Sean kind of talked me off that ledge. And I haven't played it yet, but I agree. Like I think it makes sense, right? It modernizes things, it cleans things up, and it lines up with what feels like their overall vision, which is just to like make things cleaner and faster. And
Yeah, hey Andy, how about whenever we play our games and, I power attack headbutt and I always decide to face the model that I'm headbutting.
Yeah, you figured it out. Just face.
I'm bad at
face,
that.
face
know,
my
so
table
hard.
edge, man. Just face my table edge. You don't have to face backwards all the time.
No, I must look at this model that I'm headbutting.
So one thing that when I was observing, so I was filming the game that Paul and Andy were playing, is to kind of go back. I think it was Lauren's interview. Remember when she was talking about was it Dynasty Tactics, where you have like the the video game, how that goes, and then it zooms into combat.
Big hack and slash battles.
So my head kind of goes with that, especially when it comes to troop movement, like, oh, my troopers teleported. And the way I'm looking at it right now is instead of looking at my models as individual troopers or men moving on the field, it is a unit in combat, and I'm looking at it at a more strategic organizational level, not right there on the battlefield, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to me it feels a bit video gamey, but like
Yes.
you have this group of guys, and like in Advance Wars, all the tanks become one tank when it goes to the cutscene, and like they all clump up together, and then they walk one line down towards where they're going, and they unpack when they get there. But it's
Yeah.
novel and kind of exciting.
Yeah, and that's kind of helping with my headspace wrapping around it. Where before, Mark III, it's so each model, each character is its own like thing right there in the battlefield. No, here's me as a commander taking a step back and looking at it at a more strategic, higher echelon.
Abstracted a
speak.
bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
this
a good
one's my big
point.
sticking point. Go ahead, Craig.
No, I was just gonna say, Erica, you just saying that, like, it kind of made me view it through a different lens. It's like, because my question was like, why only units get to do this? And to your point, it was kind of like, well, units are like really the only models in the game that are a unit. Like everything else is like a solo, right? Or whatever. So it kind of makes sense that units are unique now and operate a little differently.
And Craig's right. Everything used to be an individual object or person, and now you have that maintained with the solos, jacks, casters, or commanders now. But units do have a completely different dynamic now, and that's cool.
Yeah, just from our one playtest game so far, this is the biggest sticking point for me. Where this being a war game, I really want everything to be an object, a physical thing on the battlefield. So this is a little bit more streamlined than I would be used to for this kind of game. It almost feels board gamey, but maybe that's the intention, is to simplify it in that way.
Yeah, but we have to talk about the elephant in the room, which was during our game. And Andy, you can go ahead and take the lead on this one with your, exemplar errants that were, what was it, like 18 inches away from each other?
Oh God.
Yeah, right.
I have
I just
posted
take
this.
a picture.
Yeah, I have posted this everywhere. I don't know whether you guys heard about this, but I posted this everywhere to try to find someone who says this is not legal. So my errants would sacrifice movement and stand still. They're all 2 inches away from each other. They get Serenia's battle plan repo. They repo 3. The following turn, they sack movement to aim and do not teleport 2 inches to any individual model, and then repo an additional 3 all away from each other again. I do this for 3 turns, and now I have a single unit with no command cohesion because there isn't anymore, and now they're all 12 inches from each other, and his Banes can only attack one at a time.
It was the expanding universe of errants.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, being on the receiving end of it, I don't think that this was right, because when the errants got so far away from each other, because of how my Banes operated, they were only able to attack one errant at a time, and it just was not effective in order to go do that unit versus unit fighting. So I think this is something that might have been missed. I don't know. It didn't feel right.
I totally agree. I don't think that should be legal, which is why I was trying really hard to find someone that had read it differently.
We do have to keep in mind that what they posted was a beta document. So there's no expectation here that that is going to be the rules in the final position that they exist in.
This is
So
probably like exactly what they're looking for, right? In doing
mm,
that.
Is
I
break our
don't
game
know
thing.
that they're really actually doing a like public beta test. I don't know that they're really recording feedback on games at this time. I think they already have those changes made, but like that document's at the printer. This is the one they had 6 months ago that, they're basically this is the thing that looks like a PDF. Everything else is just going to be, files on some back system that we haven't, checked for spelling errors yet even. So that's not ready for public vision, but they can give us the one they had a couple weeks ago. I expect changes.
I would just say from with beta testing again, to Dan's point, this might have been an older document. Maybe something got left out in the version that was released as well. I would say for people who are out there that are beta testing this stuff, take pictures of stuff that's like, weird that you're questioning, and then add that supporting documentation to your inquiries to Privateer Press, or what do you call it, boot up a war table and take screenshots of that, like, hey, this is what happened in my game, is this correct, or this is something that I found, just to help this process.
Yeah, I agree, but was there like anything else that you think was bad? I mean, I'll say this: the endless repoing was jarring. Like that was just ridiculous. But I mean, was there anything else like Erica or Dan? Did you notice that was weird?
So, big thank you to Dan and his Swathward Freds for hooking us up with some 3D terrain. So, one thing we really wanted to highlight in our bat rep, so this beta game will be on a tried and true battle report sometime very soon, is we wanted to feature 3D terrain. And the type of terrain we had ladders, stairs, we had 2 elevated obstructions that you could get on, and a catwalk. So a couple things that were to note. One, a lot of people, or Paul and Andy, were very hesitant to use elevated terrain because it's something that we're not used to using. So as I was filming their game, I saw them, I don't know, purposely, but avoiding using the stairs or the ladder to get up. It wasn't until I think like turn 3 where I'm like, Paul, run your gun mage up there so we can put it on the camera. The other issue that we came across for the very first time was model volume. So Andy had a heavy jack and we had this catwalk. Well, hey, can this WarJax walk under this catwalk, or is he too tall? And it ended up, when we measured the height of the catwalk to the jack, yeah, sure enough, the jack wouldn't be able to fit under there based off of the new rules in this beta document. So as someone that's watching this beta game, as well as, making notes and trying to implement all this new stuff, it brought up some very interesting questions. So my biggest concern is, one, are we going to keep seeing the rehashing of a lot of Mark III terrain because people just don't want to deal with 3D terrain? Or is Privateer Press going to somehow incentivize their players to start playing with, new dynamic elevated terrain?
So I was just going to say in Mark II, this was very much also a thing, and people just don't play with it. They just add some hills, and I believe that's the extent to what, at least from when we played, I believe. I definitely never played with like cool builds.
Yeah, I think in
and
War
things
Machine
like that.
specifically, there needs to be a reason to use it, and I don't think there's a big enough advantage for sacrificing movement to climb up a ladder to be at a higher vantage point where you can still get picked off relatively
I'm gonna put a
easily.
flag on it next time. That's what I'm gonna do. Like, I think
Oh
if
There
we
you
God,
go.
please
Oh,
don't.
there you
yeah,
go.
like put a
Yeah.
flag on it.
Yeah, like
Like,
force
it's
them
just-
there.
My experience matches what they were saying about how nobody ended up using it, at least back in Mark II. Aside from like really narrative scenarios, or like something you would see at a convention, or part of a league that was being performed, you wouldn't really have these grand buildings. You might get a hill or a rock or something, but there was typically no penalty to enter that space. You're just climbing the hill. It's just normal movement. Having a restriction or like a climbing mechanic is kind of new, and yeah, it's almost disincentivizing you to climb up there to get that +2 defense against ranged attacks. And I know that there are going to be some hobbyists out there that are going to cringe at elevated terrain because they're going to accidentally knock a miniature off and its paint job is going to get scratched. So that is a concern for a lot of the community too.
And it'll take a power 12 too.
Insult to injury. Oh God.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, well, 2 things. One is like, so part of me thinks this rule isn't for us. I think this is in place so that new players, like two friends buy the battle box for the first time, they get it on the table, they're using some like 40k terrain or something, like, oh yeah, I can get up here. Like we're opening that door for that like level, more scenario or narrative play. And then 100% I you will I had my heavy warjack and we were playing warcaster on a piece of elevated terrain, and it's the one, I forget what it's called, but it's got all like the spiky fans hanging off, and I totally shattered it. Like it fell off and broke it.
I do wonder if, because these are the new 3D printed resin. And if you go take a look at the assembly of them, right? It was like the legs, and then the arms are magnetic, and the head is magnetic. I just wonder if these things, if they're just less likely to break, right? Like magnets will, fall off and stuff, and it's just, there's less things you have to go put together. I don't know. It's
Right.
I think it might actually end up being good.
I'm not putting my Warjax on catwalk.
Oh,
thing
okay.
that
Miss,
I
I'm gonna
was-
put flags up there. All right, whatever.
One thing that I was wondering, I couldn't find anything that kind of restricted a miniature from being able to move underneath the volume of another miniature due to elevation. Like if your warjack could get under that catwalk and there was something standing on top of it, what happens in that sort of scenario? There's the bases start to overlap. They're now within 0 inches of each other.
They count as base to base.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of other things that might come up just because they're kind of on top of each other in a 2D space but not really in a 3D space, so that's going to lead to some interesting interactions perhaps. And the other one that I was wondering about is that there's this like restriction on where units are placed at the end of their movement, right? And there's a restriction on climbing onto these elevated surfaces. But what if your moving unit leader parks his butt next to the side of this building? Can I place a grunt on top of the building? He just teleports up there?
I don't think that's how that works. I think there's actually like a ruling that they have to be within 2 inches or they just get destroyed, I think.
Yeah, because you have to count the horizontal inches that it would take for that model to go up the steps.
Let's
Wow.
go somewhere positive. Does anyone hate command cards?
I love command
Love
cards.
command cards.
Huge thumbs up for me.
Why do you think that they work so well?
Marvel Crisis Protocol has these. They're fantastic.
Mhm.
Right. But I mean, like, why do you think that they work so well? I mean, it seems like a novel idea, but why do you think that they worked out? I'll just say this: like, I love the fact that during that list building, and then it's like, okay, I have to go figure out like what little tiny benefits that I need for a turn, and going up against Andy, I think they were the errants, right? They're the ones that have the crossbows, right? Well, my Banes don't have stealth. Well, being able to give them stealth for a turn or then giving them cover, it was just enough in order to make sure that these models were able to be delivered safely. And I just thought that was an incredible idea.
In
Yeah, it
Mark
feels-
II, Banes had stealth.
They don't need stealth. Come on.
They don't need that.
Like one turn a game is the perfect solution, right?
Yeah.
And you can do that on any one of your things. So it really helps like ever so slightly patch up some of your worst matchups probably. And I think it's going to this and like Warjack customization and racks, as we're going to talk about probably, are the things that are going to cut down on that rock paper scissorsy feeling that this game can sometimes have at a tournament play level. I like my list A counters your list A, but your list A counters my list B. Like, oh God, what's happening? You can shore up those weaknesses at the last minute, right when you see what you're about to fight. And I think it's an excellent way to get everything on the level.
Yeah, especially when list building seems to be like it's going to be a little bit more limited when it comes to the size of the armies you're going to have available. Like for me, playing the exemplar theme, exemplars are allergic to anything that shoots ever at all. So I'm taking that cover card and the stealth card and giving that to 2 units on the way in. And that really helps just get the models where they need to go and kind of makes the list work where in Mark III it definitely wouldn't have worked.
I love them. I
Yeah.
take no issue with the command cards. I agree with everything that was said.
Yep.
It is awesome.
Yeah.
And then let's actually go ahead and talk about the the rack spells, because to Dan's point earlier, I think that they're just another layer that can help, was it like band-aid, shore up some of the weaknesses in your list. Like I don't know, like I'm going up against more heavies, so I'm gonna need more of a beat stick as opposed to a gun guy.
Or I'll change from that one slug gun to the other gun that's got like rate of fire D3. Like I need to kill an extra couple dudes this game.
Yeah, but actually earlier Erica and I were talking off to the side. She brought up a really funny point. You should actually share that.
Oh, yeah. So, did you guys see the picture of, I think it was the guy putting together the Signar jack, the light jack and the heavy jack, the picture? Okay. That gave anyone else anxiety because I'm like, okay, how am I going to transport, store, and organize like all these accessories? It reminds me of like Dollhouse a little bit.
It's gonna be a
And
lot
those
of loose
heads,
pieces. Yeah.
those heads are so
Yeah.
small.
That's definitely
I'm not going to change my head out, so don't like
Yeah.
question me on it.
You got to use the Malibu Barbie head.
But yeah, so that was, I think it's great that you can customize. I think that's like super 10 out of 10. I'm really happy for it. I'm just thinking about, oh God, that's going to suck to transport and not lose and keep it all square.
There's also so many cool things that they can do with like character jacks in this, or like you can even, in the RPG, they had like you can upgrade your Jack's Cortex and now it's got like +1 mat and some cool special ability. They can just say, we could publish, command cards in the future that, upgrade this Jack to the character Cortex that comes with your Warcaster, and then he gets to do cool stuff. There's so many things that they can do with this. It's like the world is wide open.
I just imagine being in War Room and like it has like the shell of the jack and you're able to like drag and drop and like your points are adjusting. It's just like that whole game is going to be great. I shouldn't say War Room, the Warmachine app.
The mini game.
The mini game.
Yeah, but I have to say, like, I think overall the rules for Mark IV are in an excellent direction. I mean, there's a couple of things that probably still need a little bit of polish, but I think overall the game is working in the, moving in the right direction. Does anybody have any other final comments before we roll up the podcast on any other rules that we may have missed?
Yeah, I think we actually forgot to talk about the other novel thing for terrain. Rough terrain being, oh, I touched it, it's -2 speed, or -2 to my movement currently, is excellent. Because I think it solves like 90% of the cases where you're probably losing about 2 inches of movement anyway. With the current rules, we have to start dividing your movement by 2, and all this strange math starts to happen.
Good for you. Math's good for you.
Ugh, I hate it. Makes my skin crawl. Actually, Warmachine was the thing that made me stop counting on my fingers. So, in those other corner cases where you're only going to lose like 1.25 inches, and that really actually matters, are going to be much more rare. So, an easy to calculate flat -2 to whatever your current movement is just an awesome, elegant way to speed up that overly precise measurement that you used to see.
It does feel a little bit goofy when you just barely graze some grass, and that makes you have -2 movement. But I mean, I think it's a much cleaner application of using rough terrain than having to figure out, like, you're spending 5 minutes trying to figure out how much movement you actually have. And as a protectorate player, I don't have anything that helps me get through that anyway. So
Did they also talk about if I slam or push you into rough terrain, how's that movement figured out?
It's not affected by rough terrain.
Oh, so they go. So if I push you 3 inches, you go 3 inches, regardless if you're in the woods or not.
Right. I believe it takes 2 speed off is
Oh, okay.
what the terrain does, right?
oh, gotcha. So the speed stat doesn't happen during an out of activation movement anyway. So
Yeah, but it's specifically in the rulebook calls out like power attacks that move you will not be affected by that.
Yeah. But you know what? I think overall, I mean, just reiterating what I said earlier, I think Privateer Press is going in the right direction for Mark IV, and I'm really excited to be getting some games in. And, this open beta playtest, I hope that they end up taking the, what's the word I'm looking for?
feedback.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the feedback. Like for what we're like seeing, and how we can make it the improvements to make it the best version it can possibly be. I guess with that's going to go ahead and wrap us up for this episode. Craig and Brandon, was there anything that you wanted to share or any announcements you wanted to get out to your fans out there?
No announcements. So just head over to YouTube and like and subscribe if you like the content. And yeah, thank you for having us on. It was awesome.
Yeah, sorry for outnumbering you guys.
That's okay.
All right, and then Dan, Erica, and Andy, did you have any final comments that you want to go ahead and share?
I am super excited for the future of Warmachine. I love the new look of the models coming out. Like everything about this makes me think that this game is headed in the right direction.
I want to keep grinding Mark IV games and making sure I can still play. God damn it. No, I don't have anything. I'm out. My brain hurts.
Yeah, I guess for closing statements, thanks, Craig and Brandon, for hanging out with us tonight. It's always good to chat with you fine gentlemen. I
Can't
would
wait to
just
see you
say,
guys at Nova. Sorry.
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's going to be a lot of fun. I would just say going into Mark IV, especially again, to kind of hit on what we've already talked about earlier, if you're a community leader or just, involved with this game and in your gaming group, try to be positive and keep your expectations within the realm of reality. This is going to take a little while. There's going to be some growing pains with it. So don't fret, don't freak. It's not the first time this has happened. It's not going to be the last time it happens.
And every time it does, it gets better.
Yeah, and don't forget to stay tuned to our tried and true battle reports for the rest of the year. We are going to be releasing both Mark IV and Mark III battle reports until the end of December. So that's all Mark IV from there, baby.
And I guess with that, that's going to go ahead and wrap up, I guess, a bonus episode of Tried and True from all of us here in Delaware and in Florida. We wish you the best going forward, your games, have fun, and we look forward to Mark IV. So take care, everybody. See ya.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.